We begin the day with a trade deal that has been more than a quarter of a century in the making. Today, after years of wrangling, a majority of European countries agreed to sign the deal with the South American trading bloc known as Mercosur. It has faced stiff opposition from European farmers. In France and several other states, they voted against it. Now, the deal's backers, including Germany, argue that it brings major benefits to EU exporters, but it also goes beyond trade. Now, this is a mammoth moment for multilateralism and for patience. It seems to be the opposite of U.S. President Donald Trump's unilateral act first, ask questions later approach to foreign policy. Did Donald Trump's run-ins with both Europe and South America, did that make this trade deal suddenly seem doable? I'll pose that question in just a moment, but first, this report.
The seeds of the EU-Mercosur deal were sown in a different era, back when globalization seemed unstoppable and cooperation was on the rise. But after decades of talks, getting this deal done now is about more than just business for Europe. It's part of a battle for influence and autonomy in an age of disorder.
We believe this is an agreement of immense importance, economically, diplomatically, geopolitically. It would send a signal to the rest of the world that in a time of economic fragmentation, in a time of tariffs and increasing uncertainty, by playing by the rules, by working together on a rules base, trusted partners can still achieve great things together.
The agreement will see the EU team up with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay to create one of the world's largest free trade zones. That means Brazilian sellers could more easily ship minerals from the country's vast reserves to EU buyers eager to find alternatives to Chinese exports. For Germany's car industry, it means better access to South American customers, something that could help cushion the blow of US tariffs for producers like Schaeffler.
It's of utmost importance to find new markets, and there will be growth outside the established markets. There will be growth in Brazil, in India, in Southeast Asia.
The deal will also see Europe and South America draw closer, just as US actions in Venezuela raise questions in the region on future alliances. And experts point to a broader trade trend.
There has been a notable shift among all U.S. trading partners in thinking about where they can diversify their trade links, where they can deepen them. I don't think that the administration has thought that hard yet about what it means to have more fragmentation in the global economy because of their actions.
But the Mercosur Pact has also drawn major protests in Europe, like this one in Brussels last month.
If you want to see what opposition to the EU's trade mega deal plans look like, this is it.
Already grappling with EU green rules, farmers fear they'll face unfair competition from South American sellers.
I'm here to stop Mercosur killing European agriculture. The EU wants to save the German and European car at farmers' expense. It's as simple as that.
France, Poland, Ireland and Hungary disputed the deal on those grounds, but were overruled in an EU vote. And they aren't the only critics. Climate campaigners warn the plans could drive Amazon deforestation and destroy ecosystems. The EU insists it's sticking to high environmental standards, but critics accuse the bloc of selling out in the face of stiff competition.
At one point, what we saw were developing countries and emerging markets really being the rule takers. And what we're seeing now is that they're saying, well, maybe we don't have to take those rules. And what we're also seeing is countries say, like, why would we do all these things with you when we can get a better deal if we work with China, for example? And they don't have as many conditions.
EU parliamentarians could still try to kill the deal in votes later this year. So this blockbuster trade saga doesn't end here.
Well, Andrés, Malamud is our point man tonight on this trade deal. He's a senior research fellow at the Institute of Social Sciences at the University of Lisbon. Andrés, it's good to have you with us. So after 25 years of talks, why have EU leaders, why have they finally pushed this deal over the line now? I have to ask you, did U.S. President Trump, did he play a role in bringing South America and Europe together?
He did, but he was not the only one. It is important to notice that Europe is right now suffering a pincer attack. It is being invaded from the east and it is being tariffed from the west. At the same time, it is undergoing a competition with China in economic terms. So the difference is that 26 years ago, this was an agreement about leadership, about setting rules for trade in the world. Now it is a resilience agreement. This is a defensive strategy. This is to survive. This is no longer to lead. This is the difference from a region that 26 years ago was almost a quarter of the world economy, and nowadays it's just 15%.
So you're saying the European Union and the Mercosur countries, they've come together so that they can better defend themselves against the tariffs of Donald Trump?
Yes, and this is especially the case of the European Union, because in Mercosur there are countries that get along very well with President Trump. But the thing is that everybody is eager to open up their markets in order to gain investment in some cases and foreign trade in some other cases. This was called an agreement between cows and cars. Mercosur is supposed to sell beef to the European Union, which is supposed to sell cars to Mercosur. It is not that simple, but this is where most of the conflict is located. Agricultural exports from Mercosur coming into Europe and industrial products from Europe going into Mercosur.
Yeah.
However, the most important thing here is regulation. It's about norms. It's not just markets. There is not going to be a big rise in trade between these organizations, but it is important that they still may set some records regarding a rules-based world, which is kind of disappearing in the rest of the globe.
I want to pick up on what you said about China for a moment. I know that supporters of this deal say that this helps Europe de-risk itself from China. In practical terms, what dependencies already exist and what dependencies does this trade deal reduce?
Well, diversification is key. Let's think of Germany. It was very much dependent on Russian gas. It was very much dependent, it still is, on trade with China. And it is still very much dependent on defense from the United States. So this is diversification of dependencies. With Latin America in general, and Mercosur in particular, it can also diversify opportunities, not just weaknesses. It is not that the European Union is going to be the leader of this agreement, but it has a say, it has a word. It is not just dependent, it can also set rules. And the idea is that it is not competing geopolitically or geoeconomically with Mercosur. They can be partners. The difficulty is that this is not just about trade. This is about political cooperation and political dialogue. So this is going through the national parliaments in the European Union. And there they will find still more obstacles.
I'm wondering, though, Andrés, does this agreement, does it truly advance, particularly for Europe, strategic autonomy? Or does it merely redistribute Europe's dependencies, less on China, more dependent on other places?
Well, this is the concern of the agricultural producers, especially. Now they think they are going to suffer an invasion of agricultural products from Mercosur, which is not the case because regulations are very tough. And Mercosur is going to export 1.5% of the agricultural production in the European Union. Yet, diversification is usually good, especially if it offers opportunity and not just threats. And Mercosur is not a threat to the European Union, or at least not as much of a threat as Russia, the United States, and China. But anyhow, the European Union is at its weakest point right now. And it's not very wise to think that Mercosur is the one that is going to unravel it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And if we look at this deal, it makes an exception for French farmers, as you were saying, but that seems to be a component of almost every deal that the EU makes. I mean, is this really an exception, or is this a structural feature of EU trade policy across the board?
Well, this is a historical moment. This is not just usual business, because the European Union is advancing against the will of one of its two most important members. It's usually the case that never in history the EU did something against the will of Germany or France. And in this case, Germany is very much in favor of the agreement and France is very much against. So this can bring about a situation of internal governance within the European Union, or at least within France and the countries that oppose the deal. But in the case of Mercosur, and this is a novelty. They are all in favor. And this is key because we have a center-left government in Brazil, Lula. We have a right government in Argentina, Javier Milei. And they agreed, kind of a miracle. And this is a miracle produced by European opportunities, by the European Union. This is something good that the European Union is doing for others. It's bringing countries together in other regions. But this unity outside is bringing fractures inside. And this is not good for someone who thinks that the rules-based order and regional organization are good things.
I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, the South Americans, they have everything to gain with this deal. It's not quite the same for the Europeans, especially for French farmers. And there are lots of safeguards. There's talk about crisis funds connected to this deal. Doesn't that speak to the fact that this deal is incredibly politically fragile?
Yes, it is. And in fact, it is because it's not one deal, it's two. They split it because there is an interim trade agreement that is going to be enforced whenever the European Parliament ratifies it after signature, and any of the Mercosur countries ratifies it as well. But then there is another, the European Union Mercosur Partnership Agreement, that includes the trade agreement as well, but it's not an exclusive competence of the European Commission. So it's going through the ratification of the national parliaments in all the European Union member states. And this is the political problem here. What we are watching right now, it's nothing compared to what is going to happen when this deal, the whole deal, will be debated at the national level. Because there it is when people, when sectors, when agricultural producers, when protectionist interests may really stop it.
Do you think, though, at that level, do you think that we could see this deal be completely derailed?
It's not sure, because there is an ambiguity in the juridical terms of the agreement. This agreement contemplates the possibility of being ratified at the national level or not being ratified. But it doesn't contemplate the possibility of it being rejected. There are three antecedents before, with Canada, with Chile, and with Singapore. Mixed agreements, as the EU called them. It's trade plus politics. None of them has been ratified. The political part has not been ratified, and these agreements are from 2016, 2019, and 2022. So there is no good antecedent for the idea that the whole pact will be ratified. The trade pact will probably be ratified, but it's interim. So there will be judicialization afterwards.
Let me ask you, Andrés, before we run out of time, could deeper EU engagement in South America, could that create friction with the United States, especially under a more protectionist Trump White House?
That's a key question. As far as we know, there has been no demand from the United States for this treaty not to be signed. And we know this because Trump has two very strong allies, Giorgia Meloni in Italy and Javier Milei in Argentina. Right. And they have voted for the agreement. So as far as we know, Trump may have no notice of this agreement, but for sure he's not against.
Okay, it proves there sometimes it helps to have allies in important places. Andrés Malamud at the University of Lisbon. Andrés, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's get more on this story from our correspondent, Rosie Birchard. Rosie, now that the deal has been given the green light, what happens next?
Yeah, a very long-awaited green light for those who are in favour. Ben, remember, these talks, these negotiations have spanned the entire careers of some officials. Now that we have this endorsement from a majority of EU states, despite opposition from heavyweights, including France, that means that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will likely be jetting off to Paraguay in the next week or so to sign this deal and kick it into action. But make no mistake, this may not be the final chapter in this political and trade saga for the EU and Mercosur, because EU parliamentarians should get a chance to vote on the deal later this year, and they may try to derail it at that point. So watch this space.
What do European farmers have against it? I've
been at a lot of these protests of farmers, and their big fear is that cheaper imports from South American countries, particularly Brazil and Argentina, when it comes to things like beef and meat, will lead to unfair competition. And European farmers complain they're already struggling under the strain of green rules that are imposed by the European Union. Now, the European Commission says it has taken all sorts of steps to try and address those concerns of farmers, put safeguards in place, and even over the last year we've seen them scrambling to come up with new rules to try and cater to those concerns, also heavily raised by France. The farmers don't buy it. They are still against this. And they're not the only critics. Climate campaigners are also warning that this deal could drive deforestation. But there was also a really bigger concern that stalling this deal now could be a massive geopolitical own goal for Europe just at the time when it needs to prove that it can still make friends and wield influence on the global stage.
Well, why is that? Why is the deal so important right now?
Well, I think just think back to when these talks started. It was around the turn of the millennium. It was kind of a heyday of globalization. Cooperation was on the rise. Then compare that to today, what a stark contrast, fragmentation, fracturing in the global trade system. And the EU has styled this as a kind of a shot in the arm for multilateralism, proof that partners that want to work together to create new things, to make new projects, to deepen ties, can do so. It's also part of the EU's efforts to diversify away from reliance, particularly on China. Brazil is home to vast mineral reserves. For now, the EU is very reliant on China for a lot of those critical raw materials and would like to have new trade routes for that. It's also something the German car industry wants because they're looking for new export markets, places to send cars, given those tariffs that have been imposed by the United States. And of course, that's what farmers are complaining about. They say their rights are being traded off in favour, for example, of the German car industry. Now, those goals of trying to show influence and diversify, they're agreed on by most EU member states. What they differ on is whether or not they think that this deal is the method to achieve them. And that debate will continue.
Rosie Birchard in Brussels, thank you.